Israel is at war with Hamas at the moment in Gaza, and then off to the north
Hmm.
in Lebanon,
Right.
they're also fighting Hezbollah.
Hmm.
What are your general feelings toward this whole situation?
Um, I would say in a perfect scenario, in a perfect world, a ceasefire would be, um, what I would hope for. However, it's looking like Israel just continuously keeps bombing and basically doing ethnic cleansing and genocide of both Lebanon now and Palestine as well. And I know that this particularly has been going on for several years, like decades, correct? So my general thoughts are obviously that I'm very against Israel. I am not pro-Israel whatsoever. I'm very pro-Palestine and Palestinian individuals. I've seen all of the footage. I've seen dead bodies being pulled from underneath the rubble. I also saw that Israel has like an official Twitter account where they've been posting things that I would regard as propaganda, like missile strikes and airstrikes, and no death is okay ever in any scenario or situation. However, I am confused how now that it's being turned on them and their home is being, damaged and airstriked and people are dying, now it suddenly matters to American people, at least Americans in general, like that are not leftist or liberal leaning or democratic leaning, seem to align more with Israel because it's the motherland. Um, if I don't know, I feel like I am not expressing myself as properly.
Are you talking about like the religious Holy
The
Land?
religious Holy
Okay.
Land, and also I know that because it's considered the religious Holy Land, that they have felt entitled to occupy that space that is not rightfully theirs and belonged to Palestine before.
So, in this situation now, we have about 9 million Israelis in the area that is Israel. And then in Gaza and the West Bank, there's about 5 million, 4 or 5 million Palestinians.
Right,
They're obviously not getting along very well.
right.
Where do we go from here?
See, that's a difficult question because it's gotten to a point where Palestinians obviously clearly don't want anything to do with Israelis or Israel as in general. I don't like to refer to Israel as a country because I don't think it is. I think that they have done the same thing as other colonizer countries that you consider and have just taken over the Middle East and are continuously trying to push because their agenda is more focused on, like everyone else is Arabic. They speak Arabic languages. In Israel, it's more like English. I would say the classification of skin color is more predominantly white as opposed to all of the surrounding countries. And back to your question, sorry, about where do we go from here? I honestly don't know because I don't believe Israel is ever going to admit that they are in a position where they are doing a genocide because they feel just since all of the Hamas stuff, right? But this has been going on since way, 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 way before Hamas did the airstrike. And
Yeah, I guess we can ask this question. So, what do you think Israel's goal is at the moment?
I think there's a lot of war is money. Israel could gain a lot from this war. It seems to the average person, yes, you'd lose a lot going into war. Money you have to put into supplies, into rebuilding things, but in general, like the aid that they receive from other countries, especially the United States, is massive. Very, very massive. And it's not shocking why the United States is so supportive of Israel. It's because basically it is a huge moneymaker for us. At least that's what I have
Yeah,
an opinion on.
we could go more into that. So the United States is obviously the biggest donor to Israel, and we've given them the most military aid by far out of any country.
Right.
Why do you think the United States is so invested in Israel?
Um,
Specifically, the United States government.
I feel like I know the answer to that, but I'm gonna give the wrong one. I know that we make a lot of money off of the birthright passage that a lot of Jewish people take, that are from the United States. But I can't say that that's a large enough reason to do that. But I do know that Israel's a big political wage, and also the military that Israel has is also beneficial to the American government as well. Um, but maybe I feel I'm not well versed enough in the exact specifics as to why, and I could do more research on that.
Do you think American companies make a lot of money
Money, yes.
selling weapons to Israel?
Yes, I do.
Do you think those companies have connections with the politicians?
Absolutely, because it seems that politics in America was built on business almost. Like Donald Trump being the president of the United States, being a businessman. I mean, we've had plenty of presidents who were businessmen instead of just like politicians. Sorry, not plenty, but we've had a few, at least. And when both of those things get wrapped up, it's like you're not really doing anything for the actual good of the people. I'm a firm believer that anybody who actually does want to do good things for people never makes it far enough to even get voted into anything. Because I think to get to certain points of position, you have to do bad things. Because a lot of people agree with those bad things, unfortunately. Like, for instance, I mean, I saw a lot of pro-Israel stuff just at the airport. And I have family who works in the airport. And so, when I saw the signs, I was like, I want to say, fuck your sign. Because, like, you have absolutely no idea what you're supporting. You're just supporting the death of innocent individuals. But I couldn't because, family who works in the airport. And if I say something, then that could reflect badly. And it all just intertwines. And so there's no separation between morality and politics and business. It's just all like a jumbled mess,
Yeah,
especially with companies,
especially.
corporations, large
If
corporations.
you were to try to start a conversation, a good faith conversation, with a firm Israeli supporter, how would you go about doing that?
It would be very difficult because in my experience that I've had, I haven't had many conversations with Israeli supporters just because I don't think that the people I surround myself with are typically the kind of people that would support that. But in the few instances I have, it has gotten very heated very quickly because it's like difficult to approach it when somebody feels that they are just completely and absolutely just in every single thing that they are like saying, or any piece of information that they could present to you, they know more than you, or you're wrong because this is how I feel about it, or I'm from Israel, I'm Israeli, I've seen I've personally been affected by this, yada 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 yada. Even though I have Palestinian friends who I've seen videos, like I said, who are like struggling to try and get out of the country, to flee, because even safe zones that the Israeli government marked as safe zones are being bombed. And it's just like it's very clear what they're doing.
Do you think when we as Americans look at it as a point of, oh, I'm an Israel supporter, oh, I'm a Palestinian supporter. Do you think that adds unnecessary adversarialness to the conversation?
Um, yes and no. Because I think that you could go into it just saying, I'm a human rights supporter. I don't agree with what Hamas did. Um, and I don't agree with the deaths of the innocent Israeli people. Obviously, I don't agree with the deaths of the innocent Palestinians. I don't agree with the now deaths of, is it Lebanese or the Lebanese citizens as well. And so I guess when you bring like more nuance into it and say, "Oh, I'm pro-Israel" or "I'm pro-Palestine," it could definitely like automatically kind of set the tone of the conversation beforehand. I've just personally had a difficult experience trying to have any sort of conversation with somebody who automatically tells me they're pro-Israel because it's just really hard to unwork that mindset because typically it comes from like they have family or they just have morality differences than I do, you know?
Gotcha. Imagine me.
Okay.
Imagine I'm an Israel supporter, very
Okay.
avid Israel supporter. Tell me something that would open up my mind to your side of the conversation.
That's a really good question.
Something you would really like to convey that you think might get through.
If you have been affected by the airstrike that children died from, if you are so strong on your stance that Hamas beheaded babies, Hamas committed terrorist acts against the Israeli people, then you are pro-life for the sense that you care about the being and the well-being of protecting civilians against terrorist groups. So, if that's true, then you'd also advocate for the rights to protect Palestinians against terrorist groups, which in this case happens to be the IDF. And I'm not saying that Israel as a country, and just because you're born there, you are a bad person. It has absolutely nothing to do with it because no one can control where they're born. But at the end of the day, you can't be pro-Israel and say I'm pro-life because it's just not true if you're not for both sides.
Wow. All right. I
That's
guess I'll
what
just ask you one last question. Where do you get your news from? And then how often do you check that source? And what to what extent does social media influence your information consumption?
Oh gosh. Okay. I get my news from all over the place. I'm not going to sit here and say like, oh, I have a newspaper article that I read that I know is unbiased and I know is perfectly like has the right rhetoric that I'm looking for, because that's absolutely not the case. And I do consume a lot of news, especially from social media, because I'm 20, I'm in college, and I have a phone. like, and I will say that social media has both good and negative effects on this because it can you spread a lot of propaganda for one, but you can also spread a lot of positive information. And I say at the end of the day, when you're reading these things, whether it's posted by a liberal site, a leftist site, a communist site, a Republican site, whatever, it's your due diligence to look into the information, do your own research after you're presented with it, and find the facts and come up to the conclusions. Like your conclusions need to be your own, not just what someone laid out for you. So I can see this percentage, I can see this statistic all day long, but at the end of the day, I need to do the research to actually figure out how I feel towards the situation.
Absolutely. Thank you very much,
Yeah.
dude. Right now, Israel is engaged in a war with Hamas, and they are also engaging with proxy groups such as Hezbollah in Lebanon. How do you feel about this current situation?
I think that Israel has the right to defend itself, and I think that as a nation, as a people, like I think everyone should be peaceful, but as it comes down to it, I feel like not everything has gone the best it should, but I think that terrorist organizations should not be getting involved just because obviously they shouldn't, because they have some interesting ideas, especially in their ideologies. But I mean, I really just don't think that this should be such a big deal as it is, because it's happened like for so many years. And so it I hate to be so forward, but like it should just not exist. Like this problem should not exist.
All right. So going with that, where do we go from here? How do you see this ending? How would you like to see this end?
I'd like, well, I think we're past the point of being peaceful. I think that it's lasted so long. So many options and opportunities have been given to the Palestinian people and the leaders that were or are, that the option to go back is just not there anymore. And I think that in turn with these terrorist organizations really getting involved is ridiculous. And to be honest, I think the whole problem, Israel should just solve the problem.
Solve the problem.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can talk about with Israel. The big issue right now is, so there's a large population in the West Bank and Gaza of Muslims that identify to be Palestinian. This is a couple million people.
Right.
Israel's about 9 million. And these two populations aren't really, they don't really get along together under
Right.
the same
Roof. Kind of.
Yes. So what do we do with the 2 million people if we're trying to
Yes.
solve it,
Yes.
per se?
So I know that different people like try to identify with different places within the Middle East, and while people in the West Bank and people within Gaza, or that were in Gaza, that I think that they also somewhat identify with other countries that are surrounding Israel. Not entirely, but I feel like they could have more connection through their religion and through, how, if they dislike how Israel is run as a country, and if they dislike the Israeli people, then why don't they go somewhere that has those, has those ideals as well, which is the other neighboring countries of Israel.
I see what you're saying. One of the largest arguments that the Palestinians are putting forward collectively is sort of, we have this area, the Gaza Strip or the West Bank, that is mostly administered by us, per se. Why not make those places autonomous for Palestinians, ruled by Palestinians with their own government? They can have their own passports.
Because didn't that already happen in Gaza?
So no, the actual, really what the Palestinians want is a state. So right now,
Right.
they're just...
They want the two-state solution.
Yeah, they're sort of an autonomous region. Their people don't have passports, so they can't go to other countries.
Right.
They can't participate in the UN. They can't vote on things. They're an observer state, so they have a representative that goes and listens into things that happen at the UN, but they don't get to vote. Right? They don't have their own sovereignty. So like right now, Israel administers who goes in, what goes in to Gaza and the West Bank.
Right.
While organizations like Hamas or in the West Bank um, the organization there, they kind of do like the day-to-day things like trash, mail, police, those types of things. What they want really is a full autonomy. Do you think that is a way forward?
I don't.
You don't think so?
I don't think that, like I said, I think that we're so far in this, war, and I think that Israel as a whole isn't going to give up what they've been fighting for thousands of years. And so I don't think they should have to either. I mean, if you really think about it, like as a bigger picture, I mean, Israel is the only Jewish nation that exists. And there are other, obviously, the surrounding countries, whether they have a passport, which they don't, but I mean, other countries have a majority of people who are Muslim around it. And so there are many Muslim countries.
I see what you're saying.
So, like,
Yes.
Why would you want to take from one that's only one of one when you can go somewhere else that feels more like home to you?
I see what you're saying. Okay. That's a good point. We can talk about that. So let's say that we're here in Arkansas, right? And Texas says, no, this is Texas, right? And they say, well, you can move to Missouri because Missouri, it's similar to Arkansas. Do you think that's a relevant parallel? How would you feel about that kind of situation?
But I mean, if Arkansas wasn't established,
Yeah, if Arkansas wasn't a state.
right. I mean, then you got to do what you got to do. You're going to be kicked out either way, right?
Okay. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
I mean, I hate to be like, I feel somewhat arrogant in saying that, but I feel like the opportunities have been there and they've been rejected. So that's on them.
Gotcha. I'd like to go into another aspect of all of this. So the United States has given billions and billions, up
Right.
to about $26 billion to the state of Israel. Do you think that amount of money is warranted?
That's a tough question. I don't know. I'm not like, I know that lots of people want Israel as a country, as a whole, just to be gone. And I don't think that's fair. So for me, if that's what it takes, then yes. But in general, that seems like a lot.
A lot of money.
Yeah.
All right. I guess I'll ask you one last question. So where do you get your news from? And then what role does social media play in the information that you consume?
I get my news from usually The Guardian, the New York Times. I really like the New York Times podcasts from The Daily. And what was the second part of the question?
Social media.
Social media. I think that social media plays a role in how I view things just because, you know, as you know, I scroll on social media probably up to an hour a day, maybe even more. And I do see things that I don't like, and I try to, you know, filter those things out, and just like everybody does. But I think that it hasn't changed my views as a person, even though sometimes what I see, I feel like it's propaganda.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you very much. All right. So right now, Israel is engaged in a war with Hamas to the south in Gaza, and then in Lebanon, they're fighting Hezbollah right now. What are your feelings toward this situation as it is?
Oh, I'm gonna just be honest, keep it off the buck. I am pro-Palestine. I don't think that it's I feel like this is a lot of history that we're trying to like squish into one. I feel like a lot of people only focus on what's happening currently and not the issues that have happened like beforehand, like them cutting out food, etc., etc. Like I don't know. I feel like people people should fight more for Palestine because one, they don't really have an army to fight back. So I think calling it a war is kind of like counterproductive because like, at the end of the day, it's a genocide. They can't really fight back for like what's going on with them. And at the end of the day, Israel, they have homes, they have places to stay, they have everything, while people in Palestine are quite literally eating like yeast or like making bread by themselves. Like it's just like it's a whole different, two different scenarios, two different power imbalances going on.
I definitely believe that you're able to have like a war without hurting the civilians. I think that the way that things have been going on have just like either been fully just towards civilians or just well, it's just the majority of the people that are being injured are just civilians, have nothing to do with this war, have nothing to do with any of this. And as she said, there is an entire history. There's 70 years of occupation, well, not occupation, 70 years of Israel's expanding and slowly taking the spaces that were originally in Palestine. I just feel like it's not fair to I'm, you can probably assume I'm pro-Palestine too. I don't think it's fair to have a discussion about like whether Israel should be doing this when Palestine hasn't even been able to have a political say on this during like the voting with the entire world. Palestine was never even able to give a vote.
Yeah.
So, and Israel was. So.
Yeah, we can go into that aspect of like the non-statehood with Palestine. So as I'm sure you know, Palestine, the people of Palestine, they don't have a state. They're not officially recognized by the UN. Only about 140 out of the 190 UN members recognize them. They don't have passports, so they can't leave.
Yeah.
They're kind of stuck there. And they don't have a lot of the privileges that Israeli citizens do. So in this conflict, we've seen on October 7th, we saw about 1,200 to 1,500 Israelis killed. And then since then, once the war started, we've seen about 30 to 40,000 Palestinians killed. And then the number of militants within that number is debated. But still, there's a massive asymmetry to the numbers. It's an asymmetrical war like you talked about. Where do we go from here in ending this conflict in a meaningful way?
Well, I think we can definitely start with with a ceasefire.
Yeah.
I think there's clearly there's a clear. So I'm trying to find my words. It's very clear that at least like one or two or both sides don't want to have a conversation about this because this is primarily Israel against Hamas. It's not Israel, at least it has not been stated as against Palestinian civilians. So for sure a ceasefire and then a way for conversation to happen about just getting the hostages out, getting civilians out of this war. Because for right now, like Palestinians are just forced to evacuate through Egypt, and there's like no space for them to leave other than like bribing Egypt to get out. So there's no structure to this. There's no way for civilians to get out of the conflict. So a ceasefire to have this, like, to have civilians stop being involved with it, and then just a conversation.
I see, yeah. I guess my question to that would be, as I'm sure you know, this is not the first time these two entities have had a conflict. There's been ceasefires in the past. Do you think a ceasefire now would bring about a lasting end to this conflict?
No.
Or do you think there would have to be some other way?
Honestly, I think that Palestine should have their own sovereign like state. I don't think that they should be under Israel rule because one, it wasn't even legal to begin with, and then they finally got legality. But still, also, I don't know. I just feel like they should have their own sovereignty because, like I said, it was their nation to begin with. And also, it's just like they have consistently tried to make peace with Israel, like the governors of Palestine or whatever, and it's just constantly been met with combatants. Like they have been like, oh, I don't want to listen. Like they took their water, they took their food at one time. It's just like I don't think Israel ever wants to have peace with them. I honestly think that they won't stop till they're completely off the map. And I feel like there should be like some type of like law or something put in place, and they should have their own sovereign state, because them being under Israel rule, if they won't kill them with bombs, they'll probably kill them by taking out their food or access to water again. So it's just like they need to have their own power, like that they can empower themselves and build a better community.
For sure. There's 70 years of history since Israel became a state, so, and this has just been a growing conflict. They can have as many ceasefires as they could, but there's no. It's just really hard to find a permanent solution to this, because obviously both states will want to stay sovereign states, and it's kind of hard to be there when there's so much space that's needed on both sides. There's entire populations that need to be in houses, that need to have food and all those things, and all in an area that used to be fully Palestine. But I don't know. It's a very difficult question.
Absolutely. One of the things, that's why it's not solved right now.
But yeah.
One of the things that I'd like to bring up that a lot of younger Americans have been really concerned about is the influence of the Israeli government on American politics. Are y'all aware of AIPAC? Yes.
Sort of, yeah.
I believe so. A little bit. I've heard of it.
Would you like to tell us what you know about AIPAC?
You said you knew it.
I know a little bit of
I
it.
know,
Because you
I've
can
heard
refresh
of
our
it.
memory on that, because I think
Yeah.
I've heard of it, but I'm not too sure about that.
So AIPAC is the Israel lobby within the United States that's funded by the Israeli government.
Okay.
Right.
No, yeah.
They are the number one donor to Joe Biden and also
Yeah.
Republican Speaker of
Yes.
the House, Mike Johnson. They across party lines, right?
Mhm.
And a lot of young people have found it interesting that the House and the Senate can't agree upon hardly anything for the American people, but yet we can send billions of dollars to Israel
Yeah.
across party lines.
Yeah.
So what do you make of this?
I just see it's a lack of priorities. Like, why, in my opinion, I feel like we should be funding that money that we're funding to Israel. They don't need it. They have plenty of money. I promise you, they have plenty of money. They do not
They
need
have
the money that
us.
like we need money for our own state, because like we have current hurricanes going on that like people are losing their homes, and that our government could be funding that and helping them, but instead they're focusing on a war that these people don't even need like the money for. I don't think that they should be funding. I think it's a misuse of funds, honestly, because the United States is known for helping people who are suffering. No comment. I feel like they should at least, like, if they are going to help somebody, they should at least be helping Palestine, who actually needs the help, instead of just, obviously this is because, like you said, Israel's our donors or whatever. That's why they're doing it. But it just shows, I don't know, it just shows our government's character and the fact that they would rather care more about money than their own American people.
I fully understand why people are feeling really unsure about things, especially when the majority of America's argument is like what side is right. So when it comes to both sides agreeing on this conflict continuing, I feel like I don't think anyone would want the U.S. to be involved in a war that does not involve us. Like, think of the proxy wars during the Cold War. Can't say that there's a lot of people that were really into that. So, yeah, that's all I'll say
We
about
could talk
that.
about that. So right now, it looks like as if, and you can disagree with me if you believe different, that the war is expanding,
Yeah.
right? Iran's getting involved more, like 200 missiles shot because Israel's been assassinating major leaders in various countries.
Yeah.
They're obviously in Lebanon. If Israel wants United States boots on the ground, like soldiers,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think the United States response to that should be?
I don't think we should assist. I think they probably will assist, but I do think it'll lead with a lot of boycotts behind that. Sort of like when we had
Oh, for
the
sure.
Vietnam War and people were boycotting, like not wanting to send their families to war. I think that's probably going to be the same thing that's going to happen if that were to happen.
Well, there's a lot of wars going on right now, and there was a very clear decision. For example, in the Ukraine and Russia war, there's a specific choice that America made to not have their soldiers set foot into this war. So because of the clear like looming World War III from that, and I believe that this one will have the exact same results.
Yeah.
So I hope we don't become more involved.
No. I'll ask y'all one last question here. So where do you get y'all's news from? And then what role does social media play in the information that you consume?
I think a lot of people are definitely going to say that they heard about this from TikTok because, well, I wouldn't say that there's a lot of. I would say TikTok is really like lets more information out, just in general. I'm not saying that political stuff, but you'll definitely see more content in TikTok than you see in other social media, and that's just because of like general like suppression thing. They're not going to let like kids see something bad on like it just in general. I'm not talking about like political stuff for the most part, but a lot of people would say that they heard it from TikTok first, but I definitely got the majority of my information from Palestinians that were making videos and were documenting things, as well as I will say I did get a lot of information from American media like the New York Times, Washington Post. Those are definitely left-leaning. It's just I wanted to have a like clear like stance on this, so I definitely try to get as much information as possible, not just from social media, but I think social media was very important in the beginnings of a conversation about this. But I don't know, I think it's really important to hear as many sides as possible and have your own like stance on this, because I saw a lot of people that were getting that were honest, that I wouldn't say they were pro-Israel, but they were only hearing about what was happening with Hamas, not specifically the Palestinian civilians. Well, I was only hearing from Palestinian civilians, so we were having different opinions in the beginnings, like around after October 7th, so like around like November. But as this has grown, I feel like a lot of people have a more clear stance on where they want to be, but it definitely all started on TikTok, I will say that.
I would say I had around the same amount of research, like for you too, like same as you. Sorry, it's okay, y'all. I had a long night, but I would also say that I would like to take my teacher, because I was in World Civ like around this time, and my teacher actually has like a degree in like, you know, like Israel, Palestine, like those areas as well. So he kind of like really went in depth on the history of that, like what was going on, especially when it happened, like during that like time it was happening. He showed us news from opposing sides as well as like the pro-Palestine side. So I really got to get like a full scope of all the opinions, as well as like the history to back it up. So I think that's kind of where I'm mostly for my opinion. And then like you said, I watched like direct sources from like Palestinians as well. And I think that like, as for everybody else and getting their permission, I think that people probably should take a World Civ class. I highly recommend it. I don't know. I feel like people should probably go more in depth, especially when it comes to like this type of war where it takes like a lot of history. You have to know a lot of minor things or cultural things that are involved in the situation. So I think that people should probably take like a World Civ class when learning this or like talking about this. And also just like maybe we should encourage like more open discussions like this, like what we're having right now, because it is good to hear other people's opinions. I think that being stuck in a bubble of like your own opinion, although it's like good for like forming your opinion and forming your debate, you kind of have to hear the other side to be able to make a rebuttal to that, or at least like hear their point of view, because maybe you can find a solution that way. So I think that we should encourage more open-minded thinking and listening.
Absolutely. Actually, since you brought that up, I'd like to ask y'all one last question.
Okay.
If you could say something to a pro-Israel or just an Israel supporter, what would you say? If you could start that conversation, try to get them thinking about their position.
It's gonna take me a minute.
I need to think about like all
Yeah,
of
no
their
rush, no
possible
rush.
Everything.
way a conversation would start.
Well, for one, I want it to be known that you can live in a place and you can support your nation and still find issues within that and recognize those issues. It's kind of like standing, I hate them, like it's kind of like standing like a celebrity. Like you can still like that celebrity and still call them out for their issues. I mean, even with Americans call out America's issues all the time, and we're still like, okay, we're American, but like you still have at the end of the day, when your country is wrong, your country is wrong. I feel like being able to take accountability for that is one thing, and then also just to recognize that nobody is hating on you. It's just your government, and if you take it personally, and as a lot of like, well, not I'm not saying a lot, but like the Israelis I see on TikTok who have been posted out for the world, like majority of them are mocking Palestinians. So when you post that type of stuff, it kind of makes people not want to like hear you out and stuff like that. Like I can hear your struggles and everything, but like you have to realize that like you can't make fun of somebody who's actually like genuinely suffering. I don't know. Go ahead.
Good statement. Yeah.
I guess I would say that no one chooses where they're born. No one
Yeah.
like chooses like what side they're on, and it's not really a crazy thing to say that the Palestinians want to stay in their land. It doesn't matter how deep this conflict has been going on. They still want to stay where they were, and you can say the same with the people of Israel. They want to stay where they were born. They want to stay where their culture is. But that does not mean that that this conflict could continue. What needs to happen is that the hostages need to be finally freed, and there needs to stop the whole bombing civilians. I it's a little harder to like have a conversation on like what government is right, because I don't think either government is right. I don't The way that Hamas has been like, well, maybe I don't know that much about. Maybe I should take back my statement. But all I'm saying is that the government action should not cause the death of civilians, and it shouldn't cause any suffering from hostages or injuries on either sides. And but yeah, I just don't think that the way that it's still going, the approach that Israel is still taking, is really helping the conflict at all. I'm not sure.
Gotcha. Yeah. Thank y'all very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Right now, Israel is engaged in a war with Hamas in Gaza and also with Hezbollah to the north in Lebanon. What are your general feelings toward this whole situation?
I think it's a sad conflict. I think there's a lot of loss of life that's unnecessary. But I think Israel has like the full right to defend itself.
We can go into that. In the defense of Israel, right? The United States has given billions and billions of dollars in money and also military aid, whether it be weapons or the United States like shooting down missiles. Do you think this military aid from the United States is necessary?
I think absolutely. I think without the United States backing them, we're one of their sole supporters since their like formation. Without us, they would cease to exist. They're surrounded by hostile nations that like just want to see them gone. Like from the river to sea, they just want them exterminated. So I think it's super important that America stays like a vital ally and continue supporting, like no matter through like the administrations. I think that's like a cut deal. Like without us, they would cease to exist.
Absolutely. There's a lot of talk that we can talk about there. We can start with, you mentioned hostile nations. What nations do you think pose the biggest threat to the Israeli state?
I mean, definitely Iran.
Iran?
Iran and its proxies, they've been like, for as long as like, since Israel's founded, Iran and its proxies have always been against Israel, and then Israel obviously against them.
So specifically Iran and its proxies. You mean Hamas and Hezbollah? Okay. Any other nations?
I don't think nations in general, for instance, like Lebanon, how it like used to be like, I think they have like some like national party, but Hezbollah is like taken over there pretty much, and they have their own like set up system, but Hezbollah calls all the shots. And they're kind of the people in the background that determine what happens and what doesn't. So I think it's no other nations besides Iran, but just all these proxy groups that have influenced other countries and have influence in their country that can be a threat to Israel.
Gotcha. We can go into more of the U.S. aid side of that as well. So, have you ever heard of APAC?
I have not, no.
Okay, so are you familiar with lobbies in the U.S. government, how they work in regards to the federal government? So, the largest donor to Joe Biden and Republican Speaker of the House Mike Johnson was APAC. That is the U.S. lobby for Israel, right? Do you see this influence of money? Do you see that as one of the
Well,
driving factors of why the
think-
United States behaves why it does?
Possibly, but I think it's Israel doing everything they can to keep the support where it's at and make sure it never diminishes. Because without, like I said earlier, in my opinion, without America's support, it's only a matter of weeks until they'll just get eaten apart. So I think it's them doing everything they can to influence, as I think they should, to influence in order to keep the status quo of support for Israel throughout America.
Gotcha. So, as I'm sure you're aware, the United States is running a upwards of $30 trillion deficit. And we are still giving billions of dollars to other foreign nations. The nation of Israel actually
When you mean
has...
deficit, are you talking about the foreign national debt?
Yes, the national debt.
Okay.
Israel does not have that national debt. They have a surplus. Do you think if Israel was paying for these weapons, it would change how it's prosecuting this war any differently?
I don't think so personally. National debt's been an issue through politics for as long as I can remember, and sadly, there's no real there's nothing you can really do about it. At the end of the day, it's just numbers on paper. It's foreign debt, stuff like that, and it's up to America if we actually pay it back. So from the near future, all I see is just us adding more and more, and not really caring about paying it back.
Okay. Do you see Israel... I see what you're saying. What I'm asking is, do you think if Israel was paying for these military operations out of their own pocket, that they would change what they're doing?
I think so. I just don't think they have the money to do that.
Okay.
Their population size, and they're smaller than the state of Florida. I just don't think they have the resources to do
Much
that.
smaller, yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we can talk about that, the population. So, Israel, country of about 9 million. Between the West Bank and Gaza, there's about 1.5, 2 million-ish conflicting sources. Palestinians. What do we do moving forward with
The
this situation?
solution?
Yeah.
I mean, that's been a question as long as time since they were founded. I mean, as today, it's all divided up. Palestinian governed regions, Israeli governed regions, all that stuff. I think in a perfect world, a two-state solution would work. But I think throughout history and seeing the past of just violence and terroristic acts and just everything that's going on, that as of now, I don't think that could work.
What do you think is the greatest barrier to that happening?
I mean, it's just the fuel of hate between Jews and Arabs in the region, and that's been going on since a long time. Even Cairo and the Middle Ages, extermination of the Jewish population, all this stuff. So I think that's kind of that goes back far into history. So I don't think there's any true right solution that can make both sides happy. I think, I just truly don't know. I just think that as the conflict right now, Israel's doing the right thing. They're doing the right response to what happened October 7th, all this stuff. And yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, that's definitely something else we can talk about too. So October 7th, horrible day. Between 1,200 and 1,500 Israelis were killed, babies murdered. horrible day. Since then, with the military operations that Israel's carried out, there's been estimated between 30 and 40,000 Palestinians killed. The the number of militants in that number, there's conflicting numbers. Can't really get a good count, but at least some portion of those, a major portion, were civilians. Do you think Israel has been prosecuting this war the best way it could?
Um, I think so, yeah. I think we're looking at guerrilla warfare versus conventional warfare. Conventional on Israel's side, guerrilla warfare on Hamas's side. As like you probably know, like the tunnel system, like everyone kind of knows, like they don't play fair, they play dirty. They'll hide like missiles and stuff in hospitals and churches and mosques, and they don't play by the rules. I know, like the casualty report you were saying, isn't it run by like the Hamas like health center of Gaza? So like no one knows if those numbers are actually true or not. They could be inflated. Like obviously they would try to inflate the numbers because it only helps them look good. I think they're inflating the numbers as of now because of international support for like Hamas, like as you see at college campuses and like all throughout countries, like protests, all this stuff. Like I think it's just like totally, it helps them to inflate numbers, and they know what they're doing. They're fighting a war. You're gonna do anything you can to win. So I think that's a huge factor to it. But also like their fighting style, they're not gonna fight fair. It's not two conventionals. It's guerrilla warfare versus conventional army. Obviously, like just like Vietnam, like with all like innocent people killed and stuff like that. So I think that's like a driving factor to that.
Good point. What do you think the goal of Hamas is?
I mean, it says in their charter, the destruction and extermination of the Israeli population.
Do you think that's what they were trying to achieve on October 7th?
No, I think they were just trying to hit them when it hurts. So much like rage and frustration built up throughout the years that I think it was their chance to take, and they just took it.
You mentioned the college campuses. Why do you think there's been such an outcry on specifically college campuses?
I mean, it's common knowledge that college makes you more liberal. That's kind of a thing. You go off to college, some people become more liberal through that. And I think that's what's destroying, like through like the indoctrination of that. I think it's just tarnishing Israeli support. Because at the end of the day, it's also like party-wise in like America, like Democrats versus Republicans. So it's all like way deeper than that. But for college campuses, I think it's just another movement, another trend.
Do you see any reason for it? Like why specifically college students would be protesting this war?
College students, I think that's a good question. How do college students do it more? I think college is their first taste of like life outside their parents' foot. It's their first time to like freely express whatever they think or whatever they want. And I think sometimes people follow trends that they don't really know 100% what they're following. And I think that can influence, because like if your friend group was all doing something and you just went along with it and didn't know what they were doing, I think that is kind of like the same as to why there's like a big outcry on college campuses in a sense.
Okay. I'll ask you one last question. Where do you get your news from? And then how often do you check those sources?
My news, okay. Honestly, I mean, me and him have talked about this a lot, but like, I think obviously both sides, Republicans and Democrats, are both pushing their own agendas. Republicans are going to say whatever they want in order to help their party. Same with the Democrats. And unfortunately, I don't think that will change anytime soon, and might only get worse. Personally, I'll try to listen to like BBC or honestly Twitter. Just watch like raw videos and like firsthand accounts of what's actually happening. But I think media plays a big influence into what you believe. So if you're only watching one type of media, I think it's super easy to get just indoctrinated into everything they're pushing onto you. Because for the uneducated person that doesn't have like good critical thinking skills, you're just gonna believe whatever the guy in the suit on TV is saying. So I think no matter what like news outlet you listen to, I think it's important to question everything, critical thinking skills, and just like take everything with a grain of salt.
Absolutely. We can mention that with the social media side of things. There's a great generational divide between, say, the baby boomers and more Gen Z folk. Baby boomers tend to get most of their news information from CNN, Fox News, cable news networks, where there are a lot of narratives spread, like you've said, where there's a lot of corporate influence. Gen Z people, I've talked to hundreds of kids, and the vast majority of them say that at least a large part of their media diet
TikTok.
comes from TikTok.
And I think that's
not
even
only-
more dangerous, in my
Oh,
opinion.
yeah?
But you keep finishing your question. I'll
I
answer.
was just going to say from social media outlets.
I think
more
that's
short form.
even more
platforms.
uneducated, as TikTok is owned by foreign nationals, and I think that's even more dangerous just because in America, whatever news outlet you're listening to, at the end of the day, will have pro-American interests, and at the end of the day, like they're for yourself. I think like social media, TikTok, all that stuff is easily influenced by outside anything. I just think it's just not a good way to get news at all.
Gotcha. Thank you very much, dude.
Yeah.